What is up, everyone? Welcome to Learning How to Carb Load. So we are doing this a little bit different here this time. So we're going to have a YouTube video based on this. This is going to be on our podcast as well as this is going to be posted in the Summit Strength Training Group. So wherever you're watching this, listening to this, what have you, I hope that you find it helpful. The interesting thing about topics in the field that I work in is that they seem to come in waves. And it's almost, I think I've said this before on our podcast, it's almost as though people get together and sort of like plan to send these in because they come in waves, both in terms of topic and timing, meaning the same topic is always sent in, and there seems to be this collection of them coming in around the same time every year. And so, one of the hot ones that seems to be coming up here recently is carb loading. And more specifically, the question is, and you'll see this, in fact, I'll just go ahead and share it for the folks that are watching. And if you're listening on the podcast, I'd encourage you to check out the video because there's some slides that'll help drive the points home here. This is the question. Should I carb load before a hike slash ultra slash training session? And so there's really a couple of different things that we're going to cover in this. Number one, we're going to aim to answer this. Should you even? When is it appropriate to carb load and when is it not? And it's not that it's not necessarily appropriate. It's more of when do you need to and when is it really not needed? Because there are times, like for example, if you're running a 5K or 3 miles, that's for most people going to be about 30 minutes long, give or take 10 minutes on either side of that, and probably doesn't necessitate a carb load. But as you begin to extend those miles, it becomes more important. So we're going to aim to answer the question. Number one, should I carb load before hike, ultra, or training session? Number two, if the answer to that is yes, how do I do it? And maybe also even more relevant is what isn't a carb load? There's a lot of I don't want to say miscommunication, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about what a true carb load is. And so over the course of our time together today, we are going to cover all of those. Put my phone on silent so that doesn't happen again. Topic one, what a carb load isn't. Now, I fully admit if you're watching this, you can see there's 4 different slides. I am incriminating myself here. This was an article. These are slides that I did from a social media post as well as an article I wrote on the topic years ago, probably 5, 6, 7+ years ago. I don't even remember the exact time of it. At that time, the traditional thought process of carb loading involved really 3 major steps. Number one, reducing your carbohydrate intake while increasing your training load. And the idea there was you're basically depleting yourself of carbohydrates so that when you do reintroduce them for a carbohydrate loading session, they would absolutely maximize. You can see a sponge here on this page. And the idea was your muscles soak up carbohydrate like a sponge after it's experienced a period of time without having any. So it involved lower carb intake, high intensity training session, and the third part was it would be followed by a big high carb meal in the days leading up to the event. Since then, we've done more research, we've done more studies, and we kind of realized, all right, that's kind of just simply not true. You don't need the hard training session. You don't need to rob yourself of carbohydrates in the days leading into that. And you do not need to necessarily just load up on carbs right the night before. So there is a method to do it. This is the old way of thinking. And so now we understand this not as how to carb load, but really we don't need to do this, right? So that's one way of thinking. The second thing, and I'd say this is probably the topic that pervades the ultra community or the running community or the cycling community or the hiking community or any community in which the topic of carbohydrate loading circles is, oh, well, the night before you just eat a big bowl of pasta and that is essentially a good carb load. And that's also not true. You'll see as we go on and we begin to unfold this that true carbohydrate loading is based on you personally, your body weight, your volume of training, and saturating your muscles with plenty of carbohydrate before a big event to make sure that those are fully loaded. So, yeah, that's exactly what this one is. What is carb loading? We have muscles in various parts of our body. Most activity involves the legs. So we're predominantly concerned about loading up those muscles full of carbohydrate. The reason behind why we want to do that is simple. That is the predominant fuel source for any activity, especially when that activity is either long and or intense. And we'll explain more about that here in a little bit. So the idea of carb loading is we want to be sure that both our muscles, which you can see in this slide pointing to your legs, and liver, glycogen, the two places that we store carbohydrate, we want to make sure that those are completely saturated when the time of the event, the time of the training session, the time of the hike, the time of whatever actually starts. So the entire why behind what are we trying to accomplish in carbohydrate loading, the why behind that is we want to make sure that these are fully loaded so that whenever we begin this event, then we have plenty there and plenty available to us as a fuel source. These are the predominant factors involved when trying to decide, or do I need to carb load? And if so, how much? And there's three of them listed here. Distance or length of time, how long are you active? Intensity, and as well, the third one is your overall goal. And so, more specifically, when you break these down as an individual topic, you're looking at number one, distance and length. The premise is this: the longer the distance, the more time you're active, the more fuel that's going to be used, the greater need to load before an event. And then number two, intensity. Higher intensity means more fuel is getting used in less time, means there's also going to be a greater need to load before an event or training session. And this makes sense, right? Like if you were to think about a car, for example, even a hybrid car, something that most people would say is a great fuel economy type of a car. If you were to put that car on flat ground and run it at an average speed of 45 miles an hour, you would get great mileage per gallon, right? Like let's say that you get 50 miles per gallon doing that. If you were to take that exact same car and put it on a 45-degree incline and ask it to climb for 10 miles, that mileage per gallon is going to drop from 45 or 50 miles per gallon to 25, 20 or lower. It's less fuel economic. And the same is true of intensity for our training. The greater the intensity, the more fuel that gets used up in a short period of time, the greater the need is to make sure that those stores are completely full whenever you go for a training session, an event, or what have you. So that means more intensity. You're going to want to make sure that you got more carbohydrate on board. And then third, the overall goal. Is this a recreational deal or is it competitive? And really, this is tied into number two. If it's recreational and you don't care what your time is, you don't care what place you come in, you're not in any big hurry, you're just out there doing it for the pure enjoyment of doing it, then maybe you don't need to carb load. If this is competitive, you do care about your time, you are going to be trying to keep up at a faster pace, then you may want to carb load. I think a really great distance to consider and use as an example in this is a half marathon. Half marathon, maybe even a 10K, but probably more the half marathon distance, 13 miles, is kind of that point when you want to start considering a carb load before an event because it's just long enough to where you're going to exhaust your load. You're going to exhaust your carbohydrate stores during that run, but it's not so long that you're talking about double the distances in a marathon, which is 26.2 miles, right? And so when you look at this and you compare recreational versus competitive, this could be where you try to draw the line down the middle as to whether or not you want to carb load. If it's recreational, you're planning to run with some friends, maybe you're going to walk part of it, maybe it's a part of a fun run for some holiday celebration in your country. You may not care about going through the work of carb loading. But if it's competitive, you're trying to beat your own personal time, you're trying to beat a competitor, maybe you run professionally, then you want to make sure that time is going to be at a certain level. And in that case, you would want to put yourself ahead of the competition by being sure that you carb load ahead of that event. Now, I think that this is also appropriate to consider when you're talking about just training sessions. If you're really trying to maximize your peak performance, if you're getting ready for a hike or you're getting ready for, an ultra or something like that, and you just have a casual zone two long run plan, 4, 5, 6 hours in length of time, carb loading could be good because even though it's zone two, lower heart rate, lower intensity, it does violate rule number one, distance and length is high. So to ensure that you're making sure that you're not running completely out of your fuel stores, you would want to consider carb loading on something like that, even if it's not an event and something more like a training session. So, really, you're going to use these three factors to determine and answer that main question of, do I even need to carb load? If the answer to any of these is yes, then you would probably want to consider carbohydrate loading before the training session, before the event, or what have you. If the answer to any or all three of these are no, then probably don't need to carb load, not officially so anyway, before an event. And so it's a pretty easy way to try to gauge as to whether or not you want to carb load. So it begs the question then, okay, well, I've kind of determined that I think I do want to carb load. So the question is then, well, how do I do it? This table that we've got here is a good representation of exactly how you would do it. And so we've got four different columns, the approach, and there's two different approaches, aggressive, conservative. And based on which one of those you want to choose, if you want to take the aggressive approach or the conservative approach, will depend on how many days prior to the event or the training session you begin to carb load. Aggressive approach 24 hours, but as you can see in the amount column, that's going to mean a lot more carbs. If you're going to take the conservative approach, then you don't need quite as many carbs, right? And so if you're listening to this on the podcast, it would be good, and this for the sake of me not confusing you through trying to speak out what this table looks like, to jump on and watch this video. But essentially what we're saying is you're trying to pack a ton of food in a 24-hour window if you take the aggressive approach. You're able to spread that out more if you're taking a 36 to 48-hour approach. It's not quite as grueling. And it can sound like a dream to carb load and eat as much pasta and pizza as you want. But in actuality, it's very challenging to hit some of these numbers to really hit peak performance. And it's not uncommon to hear someone who's doing this report feeling very, very fluffy. Now, one thing that's important to point out along that lines is in our culture, everybody is screaming on social media how carbohydrates make us quote unquote fat. That is not true. Only excess calories do that. The fluffiness that people report when they're carb loading is a simple draw or pull of those carbohydrates into the muscle. Now, a very key factor here is that for every 1 gram of carbohydrate that you store, you get 4 grams of stored water as well. So you will feel very fluffy and full of water. The weight will go up, the inches will go up. We anticipate that, but that is not, I repeat, and you need to repeat to yourself, that is not an indication that you're gaining body fat. You are storing glycogen, which is another word for fuel, and you are storing water. The minute after, the days after you get done with this event or training session, that water will go off, you'll pee it out, and your carbohydrate stores will be used, the excess will be used, and you will see your weight come back down to what you are traditionally seen to what you're traditionally used to seeing it at. Potential issues on that far right hand side, there are virtually none in taking the conservative route. I suppose the only one I could think of is maybe you're a little bit uncomfortable feeling fluffy, but maybe not. The aggressive route has a little more of a potential to produce issues. And sometimes that can be stomach issues because of so many carbohydrates in such a little period of time. And so again, it's really important to think about what route you want to take. I'd highly recommend just taking the conservative route, and you can do that just with a little bit of game planning. If you know that you've got 3 or 4 days before the training session, the event, the race, whatever, go ahead and begin to plan a carb load before that rather than waiting for 24 hours ahead of time. Now, last little caveat here, you'll see under the amount column that the numbers are dosed on grams of carbohydrate per pound of weight. I put this word in here. This word is desired. So the amount of carbohydrate in grams per pound of desired weight. If you are above the weight that you feel most comfortable at, use the weight that you feel comfortable at. So in other words, if you've got a person who's at 275 pounds and they feel like they're 25 pounds overweight, use 250 pounds to dose this. If you're 100 pounds overweight, use the 100-pound less to dose this. Because remember, weight is a reflection of our muscle. Weight is a reflection of our body water. Weight is a reflection of our bone mass. Weight is a reflection of our body fat. Body fat is not something we're trying to fuel necessarily. So if you are mildly or even quite a bit above your ideal weight or the weight that you feel comfortable at, you would simply want to adjust down for that. That's not to cause weight loss. That's not to cause weight gain. That is simply to dose a realistic number of carbohydrates to actually carb load. So those are all really important things to think about. Now, I'm going to skip this slide and come down to the slide that says, well, how do you do it? Because when you start to put calculations to this, some of you are probably thinking like, I'm getting like 500 grams of carbohydrates. That can't be right, right? Wrong. That is right. So if you take a 175-pound person, you multiply that by 2.5, taking again that conservative route, you get about 450 grams of carbohydrate per day in the 3 to 5 days leading up to that. So that is a lot of carbohydrates. Now, you could probably wonder, like, how in the world am I going to eat that much food? Well, that is where these recommendations here come into play. You're going to need to rethink how you develop your meal plan. You're not going to want as much protein. Protein causes food to sit in your belly longer. It's going to take those foods a lot longer to process. You're going to feel bloated all the time if you're eating a ton of protein and a ton of carbs. Reduce your protein intake in the days leading up to that training session. And ironically enough, number two, reduce the amount of healthy or volume-based fruits and vegetables you're eating. That takes up a ton of space for very little calories. Normally, that's a great thing, especially someone who's trying to balance their weight or lose weight. But this is a unique scenario for a limited period of time. So I am not advocating you stop eating vegetables and fruit the rest of your life. Don't email me saying that. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying in the 24 to 72 hours leading into this, rethink how your meals look to make room for performance, to make room for greater carbohydrate intake so you perform well whenever you need to. And third, eat foods that are simple and easy to digest. Mashed potatoes, smoothies, muffins, juices. Those are going to be much easier to digest than more complicated, heavy, protein, fat-based dishes because those foods just tend to sit well with you a lot longer. And I gave you an example here. And so you can see at breakfast, we've got a bagel listed, honey on that bagel, orange juice with that breakfast. That's 107 grams of carbohydrate. Remember, our goal is 450. At lunch, a sub sandwich and one chocolate chip cookie, 150 grams of carbohydrate in our lunch. So between breakfast and lunch, you're already at 260 grams of carbohydrate for the day. That is about or more than your average person eats on a given training day. So remember, unique scenario, limited period of time, all in the name of performance. Dinner, grilled chicken, stir-fry sauce, and a cup of white rice. You're at 90 grams on that. And then snacks throughout the day, a bowl of Golden Graham cereal, and then a couple of graham cracker sheets. Total carb intake for the day, 460 grams. Protein intake, 109. Notice that, right? Notice that exchange. 109 is a lot less protein than many folks are used to eating, but you're making room for less protein in the name of getting those carbs up, and so you don't feel good, or so you feel good as opposed to not feeling well. So, looking at this, less calories dedicated to protein-based foods, less calories dedicated to volume-based foods. Consume low fat, high carb foods, things like juices, muffins, oats with dried fruit, pastas, bagels, and then start early. Don't skip breakfast or you'll never be able to hit your totals for the course of the day. So, hopefully, all of these things help give you some ideas as to how you can carb load before an event, as well as to determine whether or not you need to even carb load before an event. Okay, I went back to pull this out because I wanted to be sure to share this as our final slide. If you have any questions at all about this, please don't hesitate to use this QR code and send me a question, right? So here's my email address down here. You can use this QR code. That'll get you over to our website, and you can see down here we've got a variety of different resources that you can take a complete and full advantage of over on our website. There are some fact cheat sheets, so some nutrition fact cheat sheets where you can download this information in one spot and go to it and access it and get all of the facts and the numbers that you need to really execute your performance. There's like 5 or 6 different sheets. If you buy the full bundle, then you get like all of the bonus sheets, which ends up being, I think, between 10 and 13 different bonus sheets that are all about the 6 topics of nutrition that are the most important and most relevant. You can use this code down here for Summit Strength to save 10% on that, on our course, and any of the resources that we've got. Plus, we've got a ton of free resources over there as well. So it doesn't matter what you're looking for. I feel very confident that you can find it if you're trying to really increase your knowledge about nutrition. And that's what everything's engineered to. We are not selling tricks, gimmicks, or tips. Everything's going to require work. But if you are the master of your own nutrition, it doesn't matter what you're training for, what block of training you're in, you can be fully equipped to know how to handle that in terms of fueling yourself. So again, use code SUMMIT, save 10% on that. I think it's accessible through the end of the year, if I remember right. But any questions on the very topic that we're talking about today, which is the carbohydrate loading, please don't hesitate to send me those. Remember, we are all about the basics here. Here's what you need to know. You will be able to determine whether or not you need to carb load or not by trying to determine, is the intensity matter? Does the length of time matter? And am I doing this recreationally or for pure joy? Run everything through those 3 lenses, and that will answer the question, do I need to carb load or don't I? Remember, if the answer to that ends up being yes, dose those numbers based on your preferred body weight if you're above it or below it, as opposed to what your actual is. Finally, remember, you will have to modify your food, your plate, to make room for those carbohydrates if you are interested in carb loading there. So don't be hesitant to do that. Know that your weight will increase. You may feel fluffy. All of those are the byproducts of the carb load, but will fade away as soon as you finish with the event or the days after the event. So good luck. Let me know if you've got any questions. Be more than happy to answer those.